positive response than what I got initially from my daughter last night, my youngest daughter, that is. I said to her, will you help me out tomorrow? And she's like, no, I will not. I will absolutely not. I will not do anything tomorrow. She knew I was preaching. And she said, I will not get up the front. I said, you don't have to get up the front. She said, is it still helping you out? I said, yes, it is, but no. She said, I won't do it. I really won't do it. She's probably got to an age now that she won't fall for one of my traps. I've conned my kids into all sorts of things over the years, and she's old enough and wise enough now to not fall for that. And then I said to her, she's like, so what did you want? I said, all I want is for you to pray for me. And she, big smile on her face, and she said, oh, Mum, I can do that. So this morning I would really appreciate your prayers as I share with you this morning. I really resonated with what Matthew had to say here a few weeks ago. And he said he was nervous because he was speaking to a bunch of people that he knew. And I could really relate to that. I think I'd feel more comfortable in front of a whole stadium of people that I had never ever met before than standing up here before people that I know reasonably well. So I would appreciate your prayers this morning. About a year ago, Ben stood up here and did what I thought was a really brave thing, and I think anybody who does that is a real brave thing, and he shared his testimony. And it's not because I want to be here this morning, really, and I know that might sound a little bit bad, but I'm here because I believe at that time God was asking me to do the same thing. And so I made a promise, and it is wise to keep your promises to God. So I said to him, the next time I was asked to speak, I would say yes, and that's what I would do. I didn't tell my father-in-law that because my father-in-law is the person here who organises all the preachers. So I didn't tell him that, so I was hoping that I'd have, a bit of time up my sleeve, and in fact I did. The next time I was asked to speak was Christmas, and I thought, no, it's not quite the right thing for a Christmas service. So that leads us here today. Now, my story is not dramatic. It is not very glamorous, in fact. It's really simple. And many of you here, I'm looking around, many of you here will have known me since I was a baby. I'm looking, I see the Craws there. I haven't always been a Craw, okay? So way back then when I was born, I wasn't part of their family. David, I remember you from my growing up years. Adrian and Brian were youth leaders here when I was a youth. And the Amoses, I think they're here somewhere today. They would have been here all of that time ago when I was growing up. I attended our church school here in Hamilton, and I even got married in this church here. And in many regards, I suppose people looking at my life would consider that I'd stayed on the straight and narrow. I'll have you know that didn't make me any less a sinner, despite the fact that, I appeared to have stayed on the straight and narrow. Now, I'm almost going to start off with the conclusion this morning. I've noticed when I've been proofreading my other daughter's assignments that they tend to start with this introduction that's almost the conclusion, like they lay out everything they're going to say, then they say it, and then they sum it up in the end. So this morning, that's sort of what I'm going to do. And I want to say two things this morning that I believe to be true because they are my experience. Number one, you don't have to have this great big dramatic story to have something to share. You don't have to have been in this terrible place and come out of it. I mean, we've all, no matter where we are, have been in a terrible place and Jesus has saved us, but you don't have to have a hugely dramatic story to be able to share what God has done for you. Now, I would like to frame that this morning and say that I am so thankful for those of you here this morning that do have those stories. I love to hear those stories. In fact, whenever we have a baptism here in this church, I often wish I could hear more about people's stories and the journeys that God has brought them on. But I especially want to say to our young people here growing up in our church this morning that you don't have to go out there, you don't have to put yourself in harm's way to really experience and to really understand what God has to offer you this morning. You can do that right here. Now this might sound sound a little bit contradictory, the next number 2 thing, so that was number 1 thing I wanted to say. Number 2 thing, and I hope I don't offend anybody here this morning, but you can be just as lost sitting here in these very pews as you can be out there in the world. And I know that because I've experienced that. You can come here, you can sing the songs, you can even serve in church office, you can know all the answers to the questions, and you can have great biblical knowledge, but yet not know Jesus. That was number 2, that you can be just as lost sitting in these very pews here this morning. Having no relationship, this is adding on to number 2, I think having no relationship with Jesus can make us very dangerous if we have that knowledge, but we don't have that relationship. And I think that's something I experienced. And that's another thing I'd like to bring out from what Matthew had to say here a couple of weeks ago, the story of the prodigal son. And I'm just going to summarize it really quickly this morning. We had the younger son, right? He asked for his father's inheritance. He took off, he squandered that money, he wasted everything, ended up with nothing, and he came back. He was humbled, he came back, and his father accepted him back. But the older brother wasn't happy to have him back. If we don't have that relationship with Jesus, we can be like that older brother. We haven't gone anywhere, but we don't know the Father, so we don't receive the brother back in the same way. If we don't have that relationship with the Father, we may respond in the same way. And I also think of Saul as well, when I think of somebody with a lot of knowledge who was really dangerous because he didn't have that relationship with Jesus. He was a scholar, wasn't he? He knew the scriptures back to front. He understood it all, but because he didn't have that relationship with Jesus, he was deadly dangerous for those early Christians. So I think those are the couple of things that I would like to stress this morning that I think I know for myself to be true. So I'm going to go back to my story now. I grew up here, as I said before, I grew up here in this church. My parents are here today, and my grandparents were in this church. I went to church school, I went right through Pathfinders. I prided myself on being able to win those quizzes in the Sabbath school. I have to say, I was probably one of the only girls in my Sabbath school class, and the boys weren't quite so interested in that sort of thing. So I did have a bit of an advantage there. I worked here as a leader with the teens in my younger years and held numerous church offices. And as I said, I got married here in this church, and it was probably around about the time that I had 2 children, aged, I think they were probably about 2 and 4, if that was around about 17 years ago now, that I really became quite unsatisfied with life. I felt quite inadequate as a mum, as I was working, didn't feel I was doing anything justice, didn't feel I was doing very well at anything at all. I was really tired, and I put that partly down to I was doing a lot of night shift. So I'd like to give anyone out there, if you're doing a lot of night shift, give you a warning, it is not good for you. I think at that time I was working about 3 12-hour night shifts every week. So that's 3 nights up every week, and maybe looking back, maybe I was a little bit depressed at that time as well. So I sort of got this idea that we would leave the country. That seemed like a good option. Let's get away from everything. Let's get away from everybody. Let's just go and do something different. So I looked around, and they were advertising. I was, by this stage, I'd qualified as a nurse and also done my training as a midwife. So I was a nurse and midwife. I saw some advertisements in Canada. They were looking for midwives in Canada, and I thought, that sounds fantastic. That would be really exciting. Let's go to Canada. Now, it was a good job. So we are talking now 17 years ago, 2001. They were offering 60,000 Canadian dollars salary a year. Now, I looked up, our conversion rate's really different now. But back in 2001, the conversion rate was 65 cents for the dollar. So that would have been about 90,000 New Zealand dollars a year, 17 years ago. So that was really attractive. I thought that sounded great. So I put my application in, I had a phone interview, I got the job, I signed some paperwork, and all I had to do now was wait for my midwifery and nursing registration in Canada to come through. And once that came through, we could head over there. Now, one day, I was in the office of delivery suite waiting for that to happen, and we had, I know faxes are almost a thing of the past, but there was a fax machine on the bench there in delivery suite, and a fax came through with another job offer there, and I thought, that looks great. It was a locum midwife job just for 3 weeks, and I thought that sounded good. That would fill in the gap before we went anywhere else, something a bit different. It was a rural, remote location. The pay, once again, was really good, and they would provide a family with accommodation. So once again, I thought, oh, yeah, that sounds really exciting. I'm looking for something different. I want to get away. I want to go somewhere else. So I phoned up. I had a phone interview once again, and I got that job. There was a few weeks between finding I had that job and needing to start, so I upskilled myself because I was going to be the only midwife in this rural, remote location. So the doctors there were very happy to teach me a few things that I needed to know, so I quickly learnt what I thought would keep me in good stead. Now, I'm wondering how many of you here this morning know where Raetihi is? Yeah, we've got a few hands. It's sort of a little bit in the middle of nowhere, isn't it? It's really quite isolated. To the south, you go to Taihape and Wanganui. To the north, Taumananui, and sort of off that way a bit, I think it is Taupo. But it was a good 3 to 4 hours from Hamilton. It's a sort of place that you can get snowed in, and they had arrangements there that if you got snowed in, the army would come up to the health centre there at Raetihi with their vehicles, and they would take the health professionals anywhere they needed to be if anything was happening. The sort of place that the road down to Wanganui could get really icy. So if that happened and you needed to get somebody out of there, they'd send a chopper, or sometimes the weather was just so bad nobody was going anywhere. That's the sort of place that it was there. We had a little 2-bedroom unit on the end of the nursing home. So there was the old nursing home, so it was old. So we had a little 2-bedroom unit, and there was a whole lot of dormitories in between, and then there was the GP and his family in the house down the other end of this block. So that's where we stayed. It was a little bit like a lodge, I suppose, in between, and sometimes they'd have skiers come and stay there. Raetihi's it was then. I haven't been there in the last few years, but it was a pretty rundown, sort of nothing happening here little town, and there is nothing much to do there. The first week or two that I went there, Mum came with me to look after the kids. Gavin finished up his job with his parents, packed up the house. We rented the house out because we weren't coming back. We were heading off to Canada. And so we were all sorted there. Now, God must have known that it was going to take a little bit longer than 3 weeks to get a hold of me. And during that 3 weeks, it came near the end of that 3 weeks, and the midwife that I had been filling in for, I think, John, is it your Achilles that goes snap? Yeah. Well, her Achilles went snap. And so she was going to be off work for another 8 weeks. So they thought, oh, Tracey's there, okay. Tracey, will you stay on? I said, well, yeah, I've got nowhere else to be right now. I will stay there until my registration for Canada comes through. So that's what the arrangement we made, that I would stay on until I was ready to head to Canada, thinking that I would not get through that 8 weeks at all. But anyway. Now, as I said before, there is nothing much to do in Raetihi. Gavin and I joined the gym. Now, when I say gym, it was a room with some gym equipment in it that we had a key for, that we'd go along and use when we wanted. We were there in August. Alicia turned 5 and she started school at Raetihi School, and Caden started kindy there. I recall every afternoon going for a big long walk around the blocks of the little town, playing on the playground, and coming home. Now, for kids here, you might think, how could there be nothing to do? You'd have the internet, you'd have TV, you'd have all of this stuff. But back in 2001, there were 3 TV channels, I think, and that was it. There was no Netflix, none of that. So there were 3 TV channels. I actually Googled this just to see, because, you know, your memory does fade a little bit. But apparently in 2001, about 37% of homes had internet, but it wasn't internet as we know it today. You remember the noise, the dialing up, and the slowness? So that's what the internet was back then. Now, it so happened that while we were in Raetihi, the date September, for us, it was the 12th of September came along, right? But it was the 11th of September is the date you'll probably remember. And I remember sitting in that little wee lounge, in that little wee unit in Raetihi, thinking, oh, thank goodness, I'm here in the middle of nowhere. Nobody's going to want to attack this place or bomb this place or anything like that. Nobody would even know it exists. So that's one of those moments, one of those points in history, you know, that you always remember where you were when that happened, and that's where we were. Now, I don't know whether it was, well, I think it was probably a combination of things. Number one, the prompting of the Holy Spirit. Number two, nothing else to do. That I started to read my Bible a lot more during that time, and I started praying a lot more, and I started reading other Christian literature as well. And I'd like to give a real promotion this morning for the library out there. There's some fantastic resources in the library there. I started reading all sorts of different things, from fiction, non-fiction, just reading about how Jesus had an impact in other people's lives, and I found that really, really valuable. Well, the weeks ticked by, and my registration still had not come through. I had phoned Canada a few times, and they said, we don't understand, this is really unusual, it doesn't normally take this long, it shouldn't be too much longer, don't worry. And so by this point, quite a few weeks had gone by, and we had not got to go to church. There's no church, there's no Adventist church in Raetihi or Awakuni, which is another town quite nearby, and we were really missing that. So I made some arrangements with my bosses at Good Health Wanganui, it was called back then, that I was allowed to travel as far south as Taihape. There was a little church at Taihape. So you just need to understand, I was the only midwife in the whole, it's a really big area there, I was the only midwife there. So anybody who turned up there with any pregnancy complications or in labour, that was my responsibility. And so much so that if I had somebody birthing, I would call the local ambulance officer or the district nurse there to come and give me a hand if I needed a hand with anything. So you were really, really on your own. So they agreed that I could travel as far south as Taihape, and sometime later I added as far north as Taumaranui, because Mum and Dad bought a little cottage there and they were coming down to the church there a bit, and I wanted to be able to go in that direction as well. So they agreed. I do recall one very quick trip back to Raetihi from Taumaranui, and I did get a few speeding tickets while I was there. That's what happens when you give a midwife a brand new car. So yeah, we started attending the little church in Taihape, and I was so happy to be there. I didn't even care what sort of songs they were singing, that they were all the really old songs. I was just so happy to be somewhere, and they were a really lovely, welcoming, friendly little church. We'd often go through there for the day, stay for lunch, and then come back home. So that 8 weeks went by, and the midwife came back, but God obviously still hadn't finished with me yet, because Good Health Wanganui said to me, Tracey, would you consider working 2 days a week in Raetihi, and then we'll put you up down in Taihape for one night a week, so you work the 2 days around that one night, relieving the midwives down there in Taihape. So that's what I did then. I relieved there, and then 2 days I'd go down and work in Taihape. Now, during this time, and I think it was probably the prompting of the Holy Spirit, I started to sense that going to Canada wasn't the right thing for us to be doing. It wasn't where God had really wanted us to be. Forgiven, I'm sure Canada was all about adventure, and just having some fun. But I think it was really, for me, it was all about the money. It was quite self-serving and quite selfish. So I started to spend, that's my umbrella. I will need that later. I started to spend quite a bit of time at an internet cafe because, as I said, we didn't just have that easy access to the internet back then. I couldn't just get my phone out and look things up. So I'd go pay for a certain amount of time, sit in this internet cafe in Awakuni and start scrolling through a site called Adventist Volunteer. So I started looking for different positions that might suit us. And to be honest, there really weren't any positions that were going to suit a couple with 2 small children. Volunteers were typically either single or just young married couples that were a little bit easier for a church to support or for them to be in a third world country somewhere. But we did apply for a couple of positions there, and we found a youth volunteer position in Brisbane that at the time looked the most promising. So I think people thought we were a bit crazy, and a few people did say to me, "You're dreaming. No church is going to take on a young couple with 2 children. How can they support a young couple with 2 children?" And I had my arguments about how we'd manage that, etc. But anyway, I was really hoping what would happen while I was there, that we would find out whether we had a youth volunteer job before my registration came through, so that we could know, right, we've got the youth volunteer job, we'll take that, we'll go do that, and we'll say we'll sort out Canada. But that's not what happened, and I think God was wanting me to exercise my faith a little bit at that time. So my registration came through, and Canada were all ready for us to head off to Canada, but we did not hear whether we had a job as youth volunteers. So we had to make a decision there, and I think a little bit of convincing of Gavin went on my part, because Canada still looked really, really enticing, and we could say no to the job in Canada and still have nothing, nowhere. Our house is all packed up, our house is rented out, and have nowhere to go. And who's going to want to take on, as I've been told numerous times, who's going to want to take on a couple with 2 children as a youth volunteer? But we did make that decision, and we decided not to go to Canada. I had before, as I said, signed an employment contract, so I made the excuse that my mother-in-law wasn't well. She might not know that, but I told them that my mother-in-law wasn't well. She had some issues with her thyroid, so I said, no, my mother-in-law's not well. We can't go across the other side of the world, and they let me out of that employment contract. During that time that we spent in the middle of nowhere with nothing else to do, I had changed. I had got to know Jesus, and I'd met him before, I'd been introduced, but maybe some more formal introductions, just an acquaintance, but I probably wouldn't have called him a real friend at that point. I understood then the songs that people sung that said, open my eyes. You know, you felt like you were seeing something completely different than what you'd seen before. And I got to that point that I felt peace and I felt purpose, and it didn't matter what anyone else was saying at that point, because I knew that all things were possible with God. Well, a few more weeks went by, and we did get that job as youth volunteers just on the outskirts of Brisbane. We in total by that point had spent about 5 months in Rarahi. Christmas came and we packed up from Rarahi, we went and had Christmas, went to Big Camp. I think that would have still been in Auckland way back then. Went to Big Camp in Auckland, and then we flew out for that year as youth volunteers in Brisbane. And that was, if you're going to go and move to Brisbane, I would not recommend doing that in January. You want to gradually ease yourself into the hot weather. It was a very, very hot place to be. And I could tell you stories of our year there in Brisbane, but that would be another whole sermon for another day. Now, I don't know whether anyone noticed the title of our sermon this morning out there. Yeah, the umbrella in the corner. My father-in-law phoned me this week and said, "What's the title of your sermon?" And I thought, "Oh, I haven't really thought of anything," and that's what I quickly came up with. This umbrella here has been in my house for a very long time. I initially bought it to keep it in my car because I thought it would be really handy for my work. In my work, I go visit a lot of mums at home with their babies, so I'm getting in and out of the car, and you know what the weather's like in the Waikato. So I thought, right, I'm going to get a nice umbrella. So I looked at this umbrella. I like this umbrella. I'm going to put it up because I'm not superstitious this morning. And I thought, oh, that's a really pretty umbrella. I like the colour red. It's got a nice pattern to it. And so I thought it was quite a pretty umbrella. I bought this umbrella and had it in my home. Now, it never ever got to my car, and I never ever used it. I moved house, and it probably had a few house moves with us, and some would say, well, that wouldn't be too hard because you move house quite often. But when we were in the house that we're living in now, I redecorated the office and came across this umbrella and I thought, oh, I do like that umbrella. And so I stuck it just sitting in the corner of my office there, and there it sat for a long time again. Now, last January, we were getting ready to go to Big Camp at Tui Ridge. It doesn't really matter what the weather forecast is. You know you've got to be prepared to expect anything at Tui Ridge, right? And the weather forecast was terrible. The weather forecast was for rain, so much so that we went and bought new tents because our old tent had a few holes in it, and we're like, right, we better go get a new tent. So we went and got a new tent and everything, ready for this terrible weather. We rounded up all the umbrellas. So this one made an appearance. So we rounded up all the umbrellas. There were some big green ones. What was written on them, Gavin? Money Mart. The Craw family know all about the big green umbrellas. So we rounded up all the umbrellas we had in our house and took them. Now, camp did not disappoint with rain. The Friday we arrived to pitch our tent, it was absolutely pouring. And we thought, right, we'll go into town and have some lunch in Rotorua, and then we'll come back and see if it's any better. We went into Rotorua. The power was out in a lot of Rotorua because of the weather. And tragically, as we were heading back from coming back to camp from Rotorua, we heard that somebody had been killed in a car when a tree had fallen on their car. That's how bad the weather was. Wisely, while we were in Rotorua, we bought a mop, and that came in really handy because once we got the tent up, we could mop all of the water out of the tent. So at the beginning of camp, I said to the kids, this umbrella is mine. You guys can take any other umbrella that you want, but this umbrella is mine. So I took this umbrella, and it was great. I could get with my gumboots on, my umbrella up. I could get to the meetings from my tent and stay dry when it was raining. At night time, it was quite handy because it was a bit of a walking stick. It would keep me steady because not all the ground at Tui Ridge is even, and when it's dark, you can't see exactly where you're going. Now, those of you who have camped before and been around a lot of other campers know there's a hazard, isn't there, when you're walking around other tents? What's that hazard? There are ropes from the other people's tents that you may not see and trip over. So this was great because I could walk along with my umbrella and it would point out anything that was coming up that I might trip over. I even took it with me when it wasn't raining because the weather could be quite unpredictable. It was also great for the sunshine. This umbrella was very handy. And I got to the point that I just liked having this umbrella with me, having it in my hand. It felt great. One point I lost it, couldn't find it anywhere. Accused the kids probably of taking my red umbrella. What have you done with my red umbrella? I went back to all the bathrooms and showers looking for my red umbrella, and then I happened to be visiting with Murray and Sharon in their caravan and found that there. So I was really happy to have my red umbrella back. I'd really missed it. Now, one afternoon, I was sitting in the big shed there at camp at a meeting. Now, this was not one of those unpredictable weather days. This was a glorious sunny day. It was really nice. And really, there was no need for an umbrella. But Robin and Sharon came up to me after the meeting and they said to me, Tracey, do you know something that we don't know? And I said, no, I don't know. Do I know something that you don't know? And they said, you've got your umbrella with you. do you know something about the weather, that something's coming that we don't know? And I said, no, nothing in particular. I've just got used to having my umbrella with me, and I like to have my umbrella. So they're like, okay then, fair enough. So for a long time, I want to tell you this morning that I think God was like this umbrella in my life. He was there somewhere, just like this umbrella was there, but it was not serving the purpose, and God was not serving the purpose in my life that He had designed me for, and this umbrella was not serving the purpose that it had been designed for. It was not made to sit in the corner. It was made to be useful. It would make an appearance every now and then, perhaps, when I moved house or when I needed to move it out of a space. And maybe, I put it somewhere to look good. And sometimes we do that with God as well, don't we? We put Him there to look good, but just at a bit of a distance. But I'm convinced this morning that is not how God wants to be part of our lives. And I have experienced that is not how God wants to be part of our lives. And I know I'm not the only one this morning. He wants us to take Him out, to try Him, to get to know Him. He wants to protect us from the rain, to keep us sheltered. He wants to steady us when we're on unstable ground. He wants to point out the dangers that we may not see. He wants to be there, when it's sunny as well, when in those good times of our life, to shelter us. I want to suggest to you this morning that just like Robin and Sharon saw me with my umbrella and said, do you know something that I don't know? That when other people see you walking with Jesus, they too will come up to you and say, do you know something that I don't know? And you will be able to respond with a yes. Whatever your story, whatever your journey, wherever you've come from, that you will have something that you can share with them. I believe this morning that if you know Jesus, you have something to share. I've just made a little list here of things that Jesus offers us that I believe so many people in this world are looking for today. For peace, for comfort, friendship, joy, a purpose in life, unconditional love, forgiveness, freedom, and hope for something more than this, hope for a future. There's people out there looking for those things, and I think there's probably people right here looking for those things this morning as well, and I know there's certainly things I want in my life. Well, this umbrella now sits in my car. I often forget it's there. And sometimes I think, have I got my umbrella? Is it way back in the boot? No, I can't be bothered getting right back to the boot to get the umbrella. I won't worry, I'll just risk it and I'll go off without my umbrella. And sometimes I do find myself getting caught out. I'll go in to visit a mum and by the time I'm ready to leave, it's absolutely pouring with rain, and I'll think, man, I wish I'd brought that umbrella inside with me. And to be honest, that's probably how my life still is a little bit. With Jesus, it's certainly not perfect. And I don't know where you're at this morning, where you're at with your walk with Jesus. Maybe, you've got Him firmly in your hand, and that's great, and you're walking along strongly there. Maybe He's in the corner somewhere, looking good over there. Maybe you've got Him there just in case of an emergency. Maybe He's somebody that you connect with just occasionally, or sometimes even forgotten. Maybe He's hidden amongst all the other stuff in your life. And I want to tell you this morning that you don't have to get rid of all of that stuff on your own, that He's really happy to help you out with that. All you've got to do is really ask if He'll help you get rid of some of that other stuff in your life. But wherever you are at the moment, I want to pray this morning that Jesus will become a real life-changing part of your life. I want to encourage you to take that next step. If you're walking along strongly with Him, there's still more, folks. It never ends, does it? Just to take that next step in walking with Him. I believe He will give you the courage that you need and the opportunity to share what He's done for you. And I believe it is God's desire that we would reach out for Him this morning. And I pray that He will have His way in both your life and mine. Thank you.